So anyway, it is a real honor and pleasure to have Bill here tonight. Slack is something we use in-house here. I would confess to saying when the young people started using it in the company, I was like, oh, here we go, yet another messaging tool, another messaging app. But I have to say Slack is something very, very different, and now we are pretty religious about using it internally. Email is really just for the external side, so you have chosen well in joining Slack. But before you got there, Zendesk, another great company, talk us back from your career, because before that was Salesforce, as Ashley said, but just talk us through the kind of role of getting to Slack.
Yeah, I've always loved business. I don't know, it was like 4th or 5th grade, I was reading Fortune, Forbes, and Business Week, and I was kind of a nerd like that. Yes, I was. No one wanted to play with me. But I did run a lot of lemonade stands, I'll tell you that. So a ton of fun though, and I spent about half my career on the B2C side. So I did a couple of gaming startups, worked for IGN, News Corp, had a couple exits. And then Mark came calling from Salesforce and said they wanted a more consumer-oriented marketer to kind of join their B2B revolution. So spent about 4 years at Salesforce, led up all of their online marketing ops. Left a little bit of time there, went over to Zendesk, took over as a CMO role, helped them go through the IPO, and then just recently joined Slack.
That's great. So I always get envious of these people who, as an entrepreneur, you think if I just have one win, I've made it. And then you see these guys who go there, then they IPO'd, and then they go there, and they IPO'd, and then they go there, and they got bought. And I know I'm not allowed to ask you if you think Slack's going to be bought, but do you think someone's going to buy? I mean, don't you think they're kind of snatchable at the stage that they're at?
I've learned to live in a Zen-like setting by not stressing over things I cannot control. So. No, I mean, I don't know. We just focus on making people's working lives simpler, more pleasant, more productive.
So let's talk about some of the numbers. The dart. Let's talk about some of the numbers from Slack, because their growth, I did see a chart the other day where, it's got the growth of radio, growth of TV, growth of Facebook, and Slack's just right at the front of that. So can you talk about, how that's gone and what?
Yeah, we've been really fortunate. I mean, in a lot of ways, we've been riding a wave of people moving from email to messaging. And when we look out at the landscape, we think this trend's inevitable. We think it's actually already played out on the consumer side. Show me a person under 30 that has created an email account. It just doesn't happen. You have 4.3 billion people on messaging services now, billion users on WhatsApp, WeChat, Snapchat, Facebook Messenger. That trend's already played out, and it's just starting on our side. So we recently announced numbers. We're at about 3 million daily active users. We have about 930,000 paid accounts, over 400 different integrations with Slack, and that growth has just been steady and up and to the right. And ultimately, I think it's just part of, like I said, this larger shift. Like it's inevitable, it's going to happen. I don't know when all businesses will move away from email to messaging for their internal team communications, but I know it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. So for internal, absolutely. External, do you think email's always going to have that place, or do you think Slack's going to somehow work out how to get the easy transition from company to company?
Yeah, I think email is the cockroach of the internet. It continues to stay around, even though how frustrating it is. I mean, it's crazy. I learned email was invented over 45 years ago. I mean, it was never invented for team communication, and anyone that's been on a reply all company thread just knows how painful it is, and you want it to die. But I don't know. Right now, it's we do focus on internal team communication. That being said, I think what a lot of use cases, and let me ask you, do we have any Slack users here? My work here is done. I'm sorry. I'm gonna head out. But a lot of times what people do is when they're working with a partner, or we work internally, we work with a lot of different agencies and ad agencies, and we'll create a shared channel. And that will allow us to communicate, collaborate on a project. And so I think in those use cases, when you have trusted partners, you're starting to see more people utilizing Slack. We don't want to just open it up to anyone, because then essentially you're getting the same type of spam and sales solicitations that people hate email for. But eventually, I think as more people start to use Slack and start to link those together, you're going to see that happening.
And how many people are there Slack roughly now?
I think our last official was around 450.
And you're 2 years old?
Just about 2 years old, yeah. Oh. When I joined, I know it's crazy, there were only...
almost 2 years old.
50, no, we did pass our 2-year anniversary, but when I joined there were 50 people. And Slack has a crazy story, I don't know if you heard it, it's led by Stuart Butterfield, and he's basically tried to make games twice. They both failed, but he's really good at the pivot, So the first one was pivoting into Flickr, and this one was pivoting into Slack. And we were talking about this earlier, but it was a cool kind of story where it was all about subconscious design, and because the team never set out to build Slack. They were just started off on IRC. They were chatting with developers back and forth, building the game. And they were like, it'd be really nice if we could send an offline message to each other while we're doing this. So they kind of built a custom, add-on for that. And then they said, we're on the go a lot. It'd be nice if we could just do a little custom thing so we could use it on our mobile phones. And they would only add a feature anytime it was really just painful, and the team's like, all right, it's absolutely worth it, but do the minimum amount of work for it. And then they started building integrations in. So they're like, it's kind of annoying when we get a bug report, goes to email, no one's there and checking it, so let's just send it straight into Slack or anytime someone signs up for a game. And it was just in contrast, and when they finished up, the game was a disaster, but they basically said, hey, we've got, a couple million left in the bank, let's go back to our investors. Do you want us to just give the money back, or we have this thing that we're no longer using email for? Yeah. And it was kind of crazy, because it was all based off subconscious design, and none of it was, we're gonna build this for this audience, and we think they're gonna like this, and so we're gonna take a lot of gambles, and it just kind of worked out well that way.
Techies building for techies, yeah.
There you go.
So scaling, you joined when how old was the company when you joined? In the first year?
So in Slack years, it was I think a half-year-old.
Right.
But they spent a couple years building the game, but relatively young. So yeah, 50 people.
The scaling of the company, I've got this kind of passionate fear around hiring, just of hiring at scale, and how do you hold on to getting it right and making sure that you hold on to the company ethos and all the other things. Have they done anything incredible around that?
I don't know if we've done incredible, but I think we share the same concerns.
Paranoia.
Yeah, I know early on we kind of talked about what's one of the things that can kill Slack, and it was interesting. We were talking about the executive team, and it wasn't like, oh, there's this competitor's going to come and do this, or this is going to happen in the market. It was just if we lose our culture. And Slack's been different. For an enterprise software company, I'm not used to working for a company that has values like empathy and courtesy and craftsmanship. It's always been a little bit different there. We place a lot of value on hiring people that share those values. And I think over time, I've even made a switch too. Originally, when I used to hire people, I would put a ton of value on domain expertise. Right. And now it's I'll put much more weight on just, do they share values? Because you can always learn the domain expertise, but it's hard to teach someone, empathy or courtesy. Can they put themselves in a customer's shoes? So I think that's helped us out a lot.
And so your team within marketing, what was there when you got there, and what is there? You were the first person in. 30 now,
left or right? So there was no one in marketing. I was marketing employee number one. Same at Zendesk, kind of when I came in. It was basically no marketing team. And that's part of the reason it appealed me to it. It was just that you could start with complete scratch. You could build those teams out. You could think about what are the best of breed teams, where can we make those investments? And so we built up teams around content marketing, lifecycle nurturing, conversion rate optimization. We do a lot of paid advertising. We invest a lot in PR and comms. Editorial, our voice is very unique, and so we spend a lot of time thinking about that. So that was part of the fun for me, was just building out all those teams.
And when you're such a fast-growing entity, you get that PR anyway, and you're getting. And did you mention you were just mentioned on Silicon Valley, the show, which is got to be a high point.
Positive mention.
A high point of any startup's career. I'm still waiting for hey, we should do that at RocketSpace. But but the key people that you've hired into your team. Well, first of all, does Slack have a sales team at all? I mean, is it?
Yeah.
Are you kind of relied on inbound?
We do.
Inquiries, is that your remit to kind of create as much of that?
We do sales, but we approach go-to-market a little bit differently.
Right.
So I've been CMO at various different companies, and one of the things I didn't like was it is a pain in the ass to buy enterprise software. Anyone who's bought it, I'm amazed actually people buy stuff. It is the most painful process. All the marketers, we have a lot of marketers in this room, right? Are all metric.
Actually, hands up if you're in marketing. If you are a marketing person.
All right,
in a marketing
so you all have your lead goals, right? How do you get a lead goal? Well, let's put a form in front of everything, right? So any piece of content, person goes, giant form, first experience with you, fill out everything in your social security number and your cell phone number. The minute you put in a cell phone number, the SDR qualifies you immediately, hands you off to the salesperson, maybe before you're even ready. You get wine to nine, which is great when you're buying the product, but the minute it's actually go to use it, it's everyone runs away. You have to pay another $1 million for professional services to actually helping you use the product. It's just a horrible experience. And so I think we really just want to think about how can we do that differently. So a lot of it, go to market, everything we do is around the experience. And I often say the brand is the sum of every single experience a company has with you. And that means the first time they see their ad, like how do they feel? Like what is that emotion? When they go to their website, can they find information? When I talk to a salesperson, were they helpful, consultative? When you have a problem, can you find someone in support? Has it been outsourced and put to the, 5 days until you hear from someone, or do they help you out right away? And I just think it's like all those little micro experiences that lead to what your brand is. And if you have a really strong brand, you're going to get good word of mouth recommendation.
Yeah. And do you think the modern way of enterprise software is to start off as sort of a consumer, bottom up, rather than going in and trying to sell top down? You see more and more of these companies starting with really light products which can do something very specific very well, and then gradually as they come up into the organization, and then they broaden the offering. And that seems to be the new way.
I like, just as a consumer or as a user in a B2B company, I like that you can just try these products out now.
Yeah.
You can demo. And then the actual users themselves, for a long time, the users had no influence on what tools they were going to use, which is a little weird, right?
Yeah.
And so certainly like Slack has benefited from that. We have a bottoms-up adoption model where people can try it out. It's a freemium model. You can try it for as long as you want. That was different too. We did most trials are either time-bound or user-bound, and we just said, hey, unlimited amount of people, unlimited amount of time, try it out.
Yep.
As time has gone, we've seen kind of the inverse now. We see a lot of like CEOs coming to us and in a more top-down and saying like, hey, how can I get these gains in productivity, or I want to see less email, and how can I roll this out to our whole company? And so it has been a mixture of both, but I think it is really powerful having a freemium model that you can let anyone come and try it and experience that product.
Did Zendesk have any freemium option? They did?
Yeah, we had a free trial was there as well.
Free trial, right.
Yeah.
So one of the things you did at Zendesk was bring in TV advertising.
Yeah.
Was that you?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You're doing it again at Slack?
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk about that.
You got it.
No, you don't see many early, well, I guess both are pretty early stage companies, but it's kind of unique, not unique, but it kind of goes against the
Would you like to know the logic behind that?
Yeah, go on.
So I think there are a couple things. Like one with Slack in particular, most B2B marketing, well in general, B2B marketing guide, like the axiom usually is to use a 40-year-old playbook that is all based around like press releases and like these old style selling methods. And I just think like, for many of us, we're in SaaS, right? And it's like, why would we be using like a 40-year-old playbook when none of us are using 40-year-old technologies? We're doing all this disruption, and you can disrupt go-to-market too. And so for most B2B companies, you're selling to a very specific vertical or a buyer. And in those type of cases, I'll usually do a lot of hyper-targeting and make sure we can just find that. Slack was kind of unique in that we sell to all segments, SMB, mid-market, enterprise. We sell to all verticals. We sell to all functions and teams. So sales teams use us, and dev teams use us, and PR teams use us. And so in that case, actually, we use more of that consumerization of the enterprise, but consumerization of marketing. So we used advertising was a great, very effective way to get our message out in front of millions of different people. And it's something that, for us has worked really well. It's helped accelerate our awareness. It's helped accelerate our business. Often I look at marketing's goal is to really help accelerate that overall growth. And not only just looking at new people, but existing users. And again, like how are you shaping that? So we look at a lot of different metrics. We'll look at things like aided recall, unaided recall, sentiment, share of voice, visits to the website. We do a lot of methodical testing. So we tested local ads in like Austin and Denver and Seattle. We would run control groups, compare it to other similar sized cities. Even when we ran the campaign in the US, we compared all those stats against the rest of the world that did not get the campaign. And it's really easy to see those impacts, see the lifts teams created, see the lifts in ARR across all these different downstream funnel metrics. But it ends up being a very effective tool for us. And we didn't just do TV. I mean, it was a video campaign, and that drove online video. We had Hulu, Facebook, YouTube, across the board there. But I think like having an integrated campaign that starts from the creative and then works out to where the channels, essentially it's an arbitrage game. I found a lot of SaaS startups, ironically, like will just focus on the online components, but a lot of times like the offline, it's much cheaper, and a lot of people, it's hard to create a video too, or they're mostly gonna start with SEM and stuff. So just even getting a video out, you're wiping out a lot of competition that would normally advertise against you.
Cool. So
hold on, did anybody see the commercial?
Love them.
Yes.
Oh, really?
All right, fantastic.
Oh, it was with animals, wasn't it?
And we had one animals. We also had a rocket ship. Sorry, I was
That's
trying
a
to
crazy
do
idea.
I know. RocketSpace, great company. So yeah, that was fun. All right, cool. Just seeing if we saw it here.
So I was going to go off on a slightly different tangent, which was targeting ads seems to be the way forward, and therefore you're going to the other way. But my little story on targeting ads was 2 weeks ago. I learned how much we were spending on LinkedIn on targeting ads. And I thought this is really interesting. So a week ago, I went and bought a whole load of LinkedIn stock.
Well played.
Who would have known? Who would have known? Anyway, another thing about Slack, which I think is super cool, and I wish it's something that we always think about at RocketSpace, is you just have such a kind of evangelist following, and I guess that can be a bit of a double-edged sword, because you can piss off the people who just adore you and everything about Slack, and then you've got to become, a proper company. But do you think about the Evangelist Network and this kind of huge following and like people here,
Yeah, I think the way we've thought about it is just that I always tell our team that our bar is not did we get the sale, it's did we get the recommend. And that's a different bar and a harder bar.
Right.
And you maybe re-explore a lot of the, at least on my side, like the go-to-market tactics that you're going to use if you want that recommend. Like, are we making sure you're not pissing off the user somewhere during that life cycle there? I think one of the cool things when I joined the company is we have this like giant monitors. It's like our Twitter wall of love for people that just tweet at Slack HQ. And at first I was like, whoa, there's a lot of cool tweets. Like, are we paying them? Or like, what is the incentive or anything? Yeah. And it wasn't. And I think that's something that, I don't like the idea of like evangelist marketing where you have to like use weird incentives to get them and leverage it. And I just think there's something authentic, like, build a product and service that people love, give them a really good experience. And they're going to tell their people, and it doesn't matter. A lot of people are like, maybe treat your SMBs different than your enterprises. Well, like I work for an SMB, technically, like for less than 450 people. You work for a VSB, right? But we know people that are part of different companies and bigger companies, right? And so I think it's really powerful to just make sure you give people great experience. One of the first things we did too that we tried to change up on the pricing side was we had this concept of fair billing policy where in SaaS normally, like when I used to work at Salesforce, you buy 10,000 seats. If you didn't use it, well, you're on the hook for at least that first year. But with Slack, we tried to do it where, you were actually billed based off your daily active users. And if someone went on vacation for a couple of weeks, like you would get credits back. And that was kind of cool. Like the admins would get this email, like you get a credit back. You're like, wow, that's kind of cool. And I like this idea of aligning your user success to your success. Like you don't get paid unless they actually use the product. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a little bit different too. Kind of get back to that experience.
Cool. I didn't know I was working for a VSB. You marketing people have categories for everything. So actually, talking of marketing people, my marketing people have given me a whole load of questions to ask you. So does Slack measure its NPS?
Oh, yes. I am a huge NPS
Well, I know you're a huge stats guy. So
I'm a big stats guy, but I love NPS. In fact, we do, anybody make custom emojis and stuff? Like anyway, so someone did a custom emoji of me. The only way to get it is to do : NPS : and that's how Bill's face comes up. But yes, I love NPS. Everybody should do NPS. If you're not doing it, do it. I'm always amazed by like businesses that don't know the top 3 reasons people are recommending you and the top 3 reasons they aren't. And that can help shape your messaging, your positioning. We measured out. We use Delighted, which is a great integration with Slack. So we'll send out the surveys. They get piped into channels. We segment it by size, so enterprise SMB. Right. We segment it by paid admin, free users, all the different ways, and it's awesome. It's like this live stream. The product team see it. They understand, what do they want to see? Not just talking to one person, but statistically significant results where they can help guide that product roadmap.
And is there because you just mentioned about the difference between the SMB and the enterprise, but is there a size of company? If you've got like 100,000 employee company, does it just get too noisy for people, or do you find that actually people just segregate into their groups and they just become, is there a problem in that around, is there a sweet spot for Slack?
I've worked for some pretty big companies like News Corp and even Salesforce, 10, 50,000 type companies. I actually think Slack's better for big enterprises because, when you're working for a big company, you're never working with someone next to you. They're on a different floor, a different office, a different continent. And on there, oh my God, when a big company sends out like a single email to everyone and just people start reply alling, like it's just, So, those concepts of like, open channels where people can join, they can see what's happening. We're going to be launching an enterprise plan coming out, and that's going to have a lot of the features that the enterprises need. So things like shared channels where you can have separate teams, but maybe there's some things where product needs to work with marketing and share channels there. Consolidated administration controls. It's a pain point right now where a lot of bigger companies might have Slack, but they might have 20 different teams using it. And so if you're an IT guy or an admin and you want to set up security policy, you have to go through 20 different instances. So having a single place where you can go and change, that's really powerful. Having a single unified directory is really powerful. Like I said, I think it takes time for people to kind of adapt to utilizing messaging as a framework for team communication. But once you do, I just think it's such a better model. Open channels, being able to have transparency with an organization, and really, like we like to say, it's not, Slack isn't just a messaging app for teams, it's an operating system for teams. And really, when you get the most value out of Slack, it's when you set in all these integrations. So the average company, I think, uses 613 different business applications, and that's hard, right? You have people, data, files all in different places, like setting them into channels where you can smartly take actions on them. That's where you get those big efficiency gains.
So the integrations piece is the kind of piece that fascinates me, because as we start, when we started, it was just messaging, then people started attaching, GIFs and documents and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So the integration network, you were saying that at the start you had to go out and ask people, please integrate with us. Now people are coming to you saying, how do we do that? How many integrations are there on Slack? And what are your favorite?
Oh yeah. We have 400 different integrations. So we were just at maybe 150 6 months ago. It's really gone up. We did hit that curve where anyway, when you're starting out, you're like, please integrate with us. We'll do whatever it takes, And then it hit this tipping point where they're like coming to us, like, and that's great. We want to have open APIs and put them in there. My favorite integration actually is Google Docs. I love Google Docs. I'm a big user there, and I love the fact you can just copy and paste the URL, put it in there. It automatically unfurls. It'll index the context of that. Everyone loves Giphy. Giphy is great. You roll the dice with Giphy. You never know what you're going to get, but it's fun. But yeah, I just think like all those types of things, like, there's some good expense reporting apps that integrate in now, and I like that as opposed to like getting an email and making me click and log in somewhere else. Just being able to see it right in Slack. And that's a long-term vision too. Like these integrations are getting much smarter to where you can create a task in Asana. You can approve an expense report, just with a click. That's where I think you see the big time savings down the road.
We do a lot of stuff in China, and obviously WeChat is predominant out there, and the amount of stuff you can do without leaving WeChat. And I think that's, do you think that's part of the roadmap, that ultimately you never leave Slack? You can do I think lot within there.
The stats right now, I think I have Slack up for 10 hours a day right now, and 2 hours like actively using it. And so we definitely see that as a place for all your team's communications in one place. And I think WeChat's a great model of that, just a platform model of where you get so many things in one place that it opens up a lot of possibilities. And I think that's what we're seeing similar to where, when they launched geo-targeting on mobile phones and maps, at first it was like, oh, that's kind of cool, and I can see where I'm at. And then it's like, what other applications could we build on top of that? And you had this massive industry, right, just born of that. And Slack's kind of unique because there hasn't been a company in at least a while that's had all of your people, processes, communications files all in one place. And what type of apps, AI, bots could you build on top of that to make people's working lives simpler, more pleasant, more productive? So it's exciting times.
So do you think people see you as a threat in a funny sort of way? Because you're, as you have more and more going on in that channel, I mean, you mentioned at the start, it's an operating, it's, why do people, I mean, do you think there's going to be competition, or maybe some big company from Redmond just says, why don't we buy them as well?
I don't know.
I can see how it does become the operating system, because everything just happens within it.
I mean, it is a shift in the landscape. I mean, I think the way we've always looked at it is we try not to be competitor-centric, we try to be customer-centric. And I mean, there's always competitors popping up left and right, and anybody that has success, you're going to see more competitors come there. But I do think there's something about, know your customers, just provide value to them. If they like it at the end of the day, they're going to tell someone else, and you're going to grow fast. And if you get caught up in, well, this competitor launched this feature, we have to do it, or they changed their price, we have to do it, it's a losing game on that. So we just say focus on the customer.
Cool. So we are going to go to questions from the audience in about 2 or 3 minutes. So just start thinking of those now. But I have more of Ashley's questions to get through. So I shall race on. What's the next big thing in tech marketing that you see?
Tech marketing. That's a broad question here.
She said these are the nasty ones.
Oh, that's good. It was so much to share in advance. Tech marketing. I think we're seeing a fundamentally shift around the customer. I think that the voice of the customer has never been more powerful. Social has just amplified that, and I really think we're re-examining a lot of the core metrics that we use to drive our businesses. And I know, for the longest time, it's been, leads if you're in marketing and closed business if you're in sales. But I think we're re-exploring that, and I think that's a huge part. The other thing I'd say maybe just as relates to Slack is again this network platform effect, where you have the cloud has pronounced all these best of breed applications, which are awesome, but it's also very much splintered the landscape. And so having tools that can kind of bring those together in one place is very powerful.
I think it's really interesting that we forget about the days when you would sign up for something that says, click this button and it immediately sends out, an invite to all your contacts in Facebook or whatever it was. And, it used to be this kind of, could I trick you to help me expand? And people just got so fed up so quickly of that it's really gone the other way. And I think you guys are really riding on the top of that. Yeah. So as someone, have you ever started a company?
Yes, I have. First one out of college.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Cases Ladder, 10 million members. First exit.
Really?
Yeah.
10 million?
Yeah.
Jeez, I never
gaming. We did gaming ladders and tournaments. Because I was a gamer back then. I was doing Command & Conquer and Quake, and I loved them. We all want to see how we ranked against each other. And I didn't even know about VCs back then. I wish I did, but so it was all self-funded, and we had to be profitable. And little known fact, it was the older people segment that played spades, hearts, that were willing to pay us large subscription fees per month on advanced statistics. And we quickly pivoted away from first-person shooters to classic games, and we made a lot of money that way.
Oh, wow.
So, that was fun.
Right.
I've done some.
So the reason for that is, for entrepreneurs in the audience today, what would be your advice to obviously from a marketing perspective, but what was your advice to an entrepreneur starting up a new company, just received their A round?
I'm going to mimic a great mentor of mine, and he's not a mentor, I look up to him. So Warren Buffett was recently asked this exact same question, and his answer was delight your customers. Pretty simple, but again, and that's just me. I'm a little different, marketing and philosophy.
What Warren and you don't have to worry about is getting customers is really freaking hard. If you can have one just customer, then you can delight them. But
sadly, I can charge about $3 for someone to join my lunch versus his $3 million that he auctioned off. But
you buy the coffee. You're in. Alrighty. Do we have any questions?
We're going to go to good Q&A, but I also, if you guys want to come sit, there's still more seats here if you'd like to come in, so please come up.
All right, gentleman here.
So, since I have a small chat company, you can either make me very happy or very desperate. So, you guys are in the team business area of, let's say, chat, and you're pretty big in the community, passion-driven area as well. Yeah. Will you do something about that?
The latter, will we do something about that?
Yeah, like passion-driven communities and stuff.
I think, we've always been focused on the business side. The business side for us is a massive opportunity. And I think if you look at the market right now, maybe 300 million knowledge workers, global knowledge workers, we're at 3 million, so that's 1% of the market. Even if we only got to 1/3 the eventual market there, that's 100 million, $100 average per user, that's 10 billion in revenue. 10x multiplier, $100 billion companies. So I think that's the math that has said this is a big underserved market for us. The communities is great that people love Slack. We haven't actively said we're not going to support you, but we just think the business landscape is so important. And a lot of it does come down to there are just different feature sets that people need. We're very cognizant, when you have enough people in a social group using it, then it gets ripe for spamming, and people can go in there and harvest emails, and you're trying to block people. It's just a different use case than the type of features that business users are going to use. So our focus right now is on business users.
That's perfect.
So this would be steering away from meetup groups who want to kind of use Slack around.
if they want to, it's great.
I mean, they
but
have to
yeah,
pay
they're
for
like
it.
we've had some people that want to run a conference on Slack, and it sounds cool initially, like, oh, this is great, we can put the channels there. But then you're like, well, what happens when that one marketer, like marketers, we always get the blame, right? Like, oh, I could look up everyone's email address and like harvest it and send stuff to it, and we just want to let people know, like, look, it's not designed for that use case. In some cases, it's going to work, and that's great. But we're focusing on making people's working lives simpler, more pleasant, more productive.
Do you think you could put advertising down the stream
Utilize advertising
as a revenue generation?
We've had a really good just conversion path. I think the people going to the paid plans, it's really healthy conversion. Relative to what I see in the industry and what people convert at, and they get value out of it. They love it. So just kind of the monetization model has never been something like that we've had to like, well, what else could we do and throw on it? And then again, like the experience, we want to have people have a great experience. And a lot of people get annoyed by ads and putting it in there. So we're just trying to balance that out.
Cool.
Hey, Bill, a great talk. I was just curious, one of my favorite stories of people using Slack was a company that was a startup that does self-building websites, and they actually used a Slack channel for their beta testers.
Yeah.
And they actually were involved in that. It was like a great channel for them. I was curious, you must have some great stories of companies using Slack in unorthodox ways. Curious if you could tell us about that.
Sure. My favorite is the Neutrino Observatory on the South Pole. So they attend the big Slack fans, and it's crazy. It's like they literally have this observatory. They've tunneled down a mile down into the Earth, and they're looking for like these rare neutrinos, and then they communicate with their colleagues at Wisconsin-Madison. And so they love Slack. It allows them to stay in contact, do it. I mean, I'm just crazy. Like they're staying down there for like a year, and it's freezing, and they're out there like, oh, we love Slack. I think that's really cool. NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, guys made Mars rover, like all use Slack and they love it. And I think that's a really fun and cool story. But I just like it because it just makes people's work, like I hate email. I hate meetings. And before I went to Slack, I just felt like my entire day was in email and meetings. And if we can just eliminate a couple of those, a couple meetings and some emails, like I think the world will be a little better place.
We had the first Slack from space yet?
It's coming.
It's coming. It's got to be. It's got to be.
Planned. Wait, did you hear about that? Who told you? No.
No. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi. Can you talk about how you set goals for your marketing programs, both brand marketing and performance marketing?
Yeah, sure. So we'll use different sets of metrics there. I think of all those earlier brand metrics that I had talked about, like aided recall is a real big one for us. So we will track our natural, I don't know if you want to call it organic growth rate, and then we'll say like, with marketing on top of that, how can we help accelerate it? And so we'll look at that. That's a big one for us. We do look a lot at experience-based metrics. So when we run events, we ask people like, hey, how was your experience there? We ask them to score that. I've also managed Slack the sales team as well as the support team. So we look at different metrics there. Overall company, we'll look at NPS. We will also do transactional CSAT a lot, so customer satisfaction. So in sales, after they complete a deal, we'll email the buyer back and say, hey, was your salesperson consultative? Are they responsive? Are they helpful? Again, we want to incentivize the right behavior there. And in general, yeah, I think everything we do is just about that experience. And we're trying to think like, are we giving a great experience? Will someone go out and recommend us? So all the hosts of metrics that really align towards that are the things we push towards. We do measure the entire funnel, from visitor to lead to converted team to ARR expansion. But I just think you have to be careful about putting too much weight, at least on marketing and like MQLs or something like that, because it does incentivize you to do some unsavory things. I'll leave it at that.
Gentleman here.
What was the most efficient marketing technique to get paid customers in Slack?
Podcast advertising has been really big for us. So our audience, for at least people bringing into the company, tend to be early adopters. And if you're listening to a lot of podcasts, you tend to fall into that group. So we've done a lot of sponsorships there. We find it's best if the podcast host actually uses Slack, because then they can really talk about it. And those are so much more authentic than when you give them a script to read. That's worked really well for us. The national advertising has worked really well for us as well. I'm a big content marketing believer. So I think like it's a longer play, but building up those assets, it gives you great SEO juice. And it's a good first experience. Not content marketing where you're doing brochureware, but content marketing where you're actually putting out very helpful content to help educate people about the industry or educate them about the space.
This question is about pricing. So we're really into the customer service, as you know, and there's this trend we're seeing, obviously moving from cost per agent per month to like a cost per happy customer. And you've seen every derivation, I guess, from Salesforce to Zendesk to now Slack. You've seen what works, you've seen what doesn't. What are some of the key insights that you've learned from that transition? And can you comment, is it real, or are we only just seeing it with some things?
Yeah, I think, first off, there's something to be said about just simple pricing. Like, really a litmus test is like, go just tell a random person on the street, like, what your pricing is and do they get it? And I think there's a lot of times you like create really weird, and it's just like, just make it simple. I think per user pricing has obviously kind of been a fundamental SaaS bedrock, but I think there's a lot of interesting other derivatives of that, pricing on usage, pricing on happy customers. I will say one of the really interesting things that I think startups tend to lean a little bit more towards going way too low on the pricing side. And I always look at, like, the way I think about pricing is it's the delta between your NPS score and your competitor's NPS score. That's how much pricing premium you have, if you will. Had to get the NPS reference in there. But we ran a really interesting, so we do a lot of testing. Like, I'm just big data-driven marketer, and when we were at Zendesk, we did a lot of pricing and sensitivity analysis. And when we were launching a higher tier plan, we did some different pricing tests on it. And it turned out the higher price actually generated more demand. And a lot of it is perception too. Because even in SaaS, like, a lot of times you're competing against like really old players like Oracle and SAP, and they're charging at such a huge price premium that if you go too low, you kind of view it as like, oh, it's a cheap option, or why would I use that? So, definitely explore, like, split test these things and just try to get more data around it. Yeah.
So I actually have a question going back more towards your Salesforce days, because Salesforce actually managed to bypass the whole enterprise sales and went directly to the users, which is your sales guys. And so you completely bypass that whole enterprise sales. So do you have any advice on how did you focus on those users, or did it just happen? And how did you approach those users? How did you market to those users? Which channels worked for you?
Yeah, I think when you're marketing directly to users, you're going to speak in their language. You're going to think about, like, what are the different channels you kind of reach them out. A lot of it's around PR. It's around aligning yourself to a movement. So at Salesforce back then, it was no software. This idea of, like, people hated disks and installing it and maintaining it and versioning. It was like a huge pain point. And people just associated with it. And it was almost like Salesforce became a movement. And I think that's really powerful. That being said, I think any company, definitely at Salesforce, we quickly did enterprise sales too, and did top bottom. And even at Slack, like, at some point when you're working with larger companies, it's not like it's like you're trying to work with different people, but like you have to talk with the IT person. You have to go through procurement. You have to go through legal, and it's really hard to just say, we're just going to completely ignore that group, And so we like to, like, anytime we engage with a bigger company, we right away, we start working with those people. We let them know, we help them understand who's using Slack, what are the benefits of moving to these different plans, and help them explain the value to them. It's really hard to get a wall-to-wall deal through if you're exclusively going bottoms up.
Hi. I'm in a marketing position now where the company is less than 2 years old, and it's me and one person. And I'm curious how you decide where to focus on what, like between content marketing, PR, paid advertising, sponsorship. I mean, clearly there's the whole, well, who's your customer? But I think you have to be a little ahead of where you are in the market in your marketing. So I'd love to hear, just say from the 0 days up, how that rolled out over time.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the first heads when I build a team, I usually like to build it around the analytics or attribution. I just think, like, you're eventually going to be having a paid budget, and if you can demonstrate exactly how much you spent, how much value it returned, like, that's really powerful. And attribution is, like, it's a tricky, complex area when you're dealing with multi-channel attribution, multi-touch attribution, like what's credit, how much weight you're giving, all that stuff there. So I like that first. I think from there, a lot of it's just going to depend on the company. So when I came to Slack, one of the first things, like, I noticed was, like, the messaging was just all over the place. Like, I asked 50 people, like, how would you describe it? And I got 50 different answers. And that's surprisingly really hard, like, to sum up what your company does in one sentence or 4 words or 2 words. So I think there's something we said in the early days about the positioning, the messaging side of it. And then I think the last thing I'd say too is, as the company grows, I don't think marketing's role should be limited just to leads, getting them in the door. I think it's the entire life cycle. And so I've built out a lot of teams that focus just on life cycle nurturing, helping people get through, understanding where they're getting stuck, education, evangelism. I think it's that entire life cycle that you have to think about.
So the relationship between sales and marketing at Slack, that can obviously be a big problem in a lot of organizations. What's that like for you guys, and how has it contributed to success?
It's really strong. For a while, actually, I did manage the sales team. We recently just brought in our first VP of sales, Robert Fratty from Salesforce, who I know and had worked with there. So it's a great relationship. I think early on, we just decided we want to have a great go-to-market experience. And so we put in a lot of the frameworks of the right metrics. Like I said, we look at the metrics for our sales team around the customer satisfaction after they do a sale, the customer satisfaction after they do the first 3 months of onboarding. We'll look at the NPS of their accounts, how does it compare to other accounts. And we'll also look at just how much ARR and daily active users, but it's a combination of all those things to kind of make sure that we focus on the end goal. The other thing I think too is really interesting is having concept of shared goals. Not having a totally different goal for marketing than the sales, that's naturally going to create friction and animosity. And to the point, you can even have company goals that all the functional teams work towards. I think it creates much more of a team environment than a kind of pitting people against each other environment.
So you're obviously growing extremely fast at the moment, but are you still constantly under pressure to, we want it faster, or is the back end of the business going, okay, this is fine, just hold it steady there, we're trying to catch up?
We think, and I've studied a lot of SaaS companies, we do think it's the fastest growing business application ever. We think it's faster than Salesforce or Workday or a lot of those comps. That being said, no matter how fast you're growing, it's always could we grow faster? What can we do to help accelerate that? And I think that was part of the national ad campaign too for us, this was an opportunity to help accelerate that. And when you think about it, like I said earlier, if you do believe there's 300 million or 1 billion global knowledge workers, depending on your estimates there, we're at 3 million DAUs. That's 1% or a third of 1%, right? So we think there's such a long way to go, and we just like being part of that revolution.
Sort of land grab.
Yeah.
Go get it. Another question?
You mentioned that you did found your own company in your early days. What are 2 things that you know now that you wish you knew at that time? And are there any things that you experienced at that time that have helped you in your career until now?
I really wish I knew about VCs, and I really wish I knew how much you can sell a company for, because we sold for way little than we could have. But yeah, that's what I wish I knew. That would have helped. And I don't know. I think back then I wasn't as customer centric. I would do a lot just to hit whatever metric we needed it to hit. But I think it had it was a very short term focus. And I think now just seeing a lot of different companies, again, just much more focused on the long term. Where you say, just like that, we're trying to get to 1 billion global knowledge workers. And what would you do to get to that versus just saying, all right, we just got to get 10 sales or move the needle there. So just very customer centric is how I've kind of changed my approach.
I love the fact that you like stats and numbers. What are your favorite tools, and how do you make them? You seem like you have a grasp of reality as well as numbers, and they usually don't come together in one package. What are your favorites, and where do you think that's going, and is AI going to help you?
Favorite metrics or favorite tools?
Both.
So my favorite tool is around attribution, so Convertro we use. A lot of different companies out there, they'll do attribution analysis, some big players like Google, or there's smaller players out there. But I just think in B2B especially, it's never one touch and they buy, right? It's 3 months, they might be 20 touches. How do you attribute credit out? And even not only from a channel perspective, from a content perspective, I think that's really interesting. And favorite metric, NPS, I think we've established that. But I don't know, other ones, CSAT, I don't know, anything just around that customer experience. I was talking to our head of support, and I was I was excited. I'm I think we heard this new metric for support. It's called how much time it took you to find the answer. And it's not just first respond time, but a lot of times people will go to 3 different sources before they found the answer. And so it's kind of looking at that, and I thought that was really interesting because support in particular, there's always pressure to reduce costs and just churn through as much as you can. And so we have something that we use. It's called Ticket Quality Review, TQR. And what we do is we'll take a sample of all the support tickets that went out, and then the management team on the support side will rate every single one of those based on our values. So how did this response align to us being courteous, to us being empathetic, to us being craftsmanship? Did we actually give the answer? And then we go and we score every single one. And I think that's kind of a cool metric that focuses you to think about are you living to your company's values and mission, or are you just like trying to get as much stuff as you can done? I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, here. On the sales side, what, especially when you're dealing with sort of like the bigger enterprises and maybe not the technology companies who have the early adopters, some more like the industrials or financials, presumably you have them as some customers. Like, I feel like with enterprise software, sometimes it's like a return on investment story. Like but I feel like that would be difficult for you to sort of prove out a return on investments. What sort of like your main selling point, or what really sells, sort of a CIO at, one of these not old school, but, non-tech companies?
Sure. So it's pretty amazing. Slack is actually used at 77 of the Fortune 100 now. So very widespread adoption. And actually, I hit just what you had mentioned, ROI results. So that was one of the first things when I came in, and I was like, I feel like I'm more productive, and I feel like I'm seeing less email. And so I'm like, let's just ask our customers. So we did this massive customer survey, and we got about 2,000 people to respond to that. And on average, they saw 32% lift in productivity, 50% less email, 25% less meetings, 80% agreed that it improved the transparency of the company, and 80% agreed that it improved the culture. So that's pretty powerful. When you can go to a giant company like a G that has 300,000 people and say, hey, how much would it cost for you to hire 32% more people versus just making them more productive? And people don't realize that there's a lot of good stats. Like McKinsey has a great stat that we spend I think it's 52% of our day is spent just triaging through email, looking for information, trying to find that file, trying to communicate with someone. That's like a huge, massive time sink. And if you can just be more efficient and productive there. So a lot of times we will go to the ROI. I've also equated it down to the pennies per day argument, where you say like, hey, an average worker, maybe let's say you're a developer, right? It might be $100,000 all in. That's $50 an hour. Slack costs a couple pennies per hour. If you can even make them 1% more productive, you've already seen an ROI gain. So, there's different ways to tell those stories. But I do think when you go to enterprise, you got to have a good argument. You got to show like, hey, this is bottom line results. This is why it's going to save you money, or this is why it's going to make your team more productive. Because at the end of the day, a lot of those people just haven't used the product. It comes to I've never heard of Slack. I remember we had a CEO from a big financial services company come in, and she's like, so you're going to eliminate all my email. I was like, well, let me tell you about how we can mostly do that. Internal email, not external email. So anyway, that's what we've used.
Do you guys do a developer conference yet?
Yeah, so we've done 4 city tours. We did Toronto, New York, London, and San Francisco. We are talking about a user conference coming up. But yeah, basically for us, it's our users, it's prospects, it's partners, developers, kind of creating a great ecosystem there.
Is anyone here building something specifically on Slack or on the back of Slack?
Let me tell you about our platform, everyone. Anything you can send an email to someone, one of your users via notification, you can send into Slack. And you can have them take cool actions on it, so you should all check that out. Talk to your developers.
Sorry to interrupt the pitch there. Thanks
what
for
I
joining.
do, I'm in marketing. Come on, we're marketers talking to marketers here. We expect this.
Very refreshing, Bill, to hear your customer-centric approach, especially coming from a variety of such fast-growing, nascent B2B companies, not something you often hear from marketing leadership. Can you talk a little bit about how you think through balancing the short-term needs of the accountability of every dollar you put in versus the long-term vision of the business?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Like on the national ad campaign, one of the ways I position it is that lead gen is short-term lead gen and brand is long-term lead gen. And it is a balance there, right? And it's hard. I totally understand. Like the short-term metrics and pressures, it's hard. No matter what stage company you're at, you've got investors, you have public market that are always putting pressures on you to succeed. And I just think, if you look back in history, the most successful companies are those that just took a very long-term horizon. I have a lot of respect for Jeff Bezos. And a lot of times, even with their goals, it's really interesting. Like their goals, when they set up, they never set out a revenue goal. They think about inputs and outputs. Like the revenue is an output, but the inputs are faster delivery times, better product depth, better customer service. Like that leads to more revenue. And so I think in some ways you just have to, be really particular about, the boards, the VCs you're taking. What is their outlook? Are they around for that long-term vision, and how can you align the team around it? But it's hard. There's always going to be that. The short-term accountability, you still need to track all that stuff, and that's why get the attribution of marketing. You need to be accountable. But I think you can, like I said, you can have a sales team that's accountable to an NPS metric or a CSAT metric. It just doesn't have to be like just how it's always been done in the old way, just the amount sold. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can disrupt that.
Hi, I really admire a lot of the creativity and channels that you've been using with Slack, just to kind of talk with customers or just to kind of get your message across. And I'm really curious, it seems like you've been trying a lot of different things. Is there any that have worked out unexpectedly well for you that you weren't maybe sure, we'll just give this a shot and it's kind of worked really well? And then just on the flip side, anything that you thought this is really going to work and you try it out and it really just doesn't give you the results or whatnot that you thought it would?
Yeah, so we always have a little betting pool when we do homepage tests. We've gone through, I think, 40 versions of homepage tests. And if there's one thing I've learned is that never listen to the higher ups, including myself. We always pick the wrong ones. So, whether it's me or Stuart, we're like, oh, this one's gonna win. I know it's gonna win. How much? $1 million? It never wins, right? So that's been surprising. Just as far as running these different tests, which ones work. Messaging creative. So we did a big test on the spaceship ad versus the animals ad. Both around amazing teams, and we actually did a YouTube homepage takeover. So we had a pure 50-50 split test, right? And it was really interesting because in that case, animals clearly won. It had the most thumbs up to thumbs down ratio. It had the most shares, most read likes, and so we're going to run the national campaign, and we're like, oh well, it's animals, right? And then we started doing some local market testing. And what we saw was that spaceships actually improved aided recall much more than animals did. And so that was an interesting one. And we're like, wow, one works better for kind of sentiment and just people having a visceral reaction and sharing it. I've since learned there's a subgroup on the internet called furries that really love just anything animated. I'm not sure if they're throwing off the test results or not, but who knows? We ended up doing a national campaign. We did both. We did animals to start, 2-week break, and then we finished off with spaceships. But those are fun learnings. I mean, the thing I've always come to is I hate ivory tower marketing. I hate when C-suite sit there and say, this is what our users want, or this is the message they're going to react to, or this is what's going to get them to buy more, or this is the pricing that they're best going to react to. You can test all that stuff. There's no need to get into those. Let the people choose.
Hi there. So would you define Slack as B2B2C? Is that accurate?
No, B2B2C. It depends on the use case. We are seeing, potentially some companies like the beta test example of where a B2B company is actually going out to their users and seeing what are they actually using it for. But in general, I don't think we just don't think in those terms. It's more we just think about we want to be an operating system for businesses. We want to make people's working life simpler, more pleasant, more productive. And to the extent that we can make their working lives better, so be it.
So I guess where my question was coming from is that you've got the enterprise buyers that you've talked about, but then the end users within any organization, right, are a different audience. So what I'd love to hear a bit more about is how do you determine who you're building your messaging, your marketing spend, et cetera, around, knowing that there are two very unique audiences to engage. One's the buyer, one's the ultimate user. And does that change over time?
A wise person once told me, because us marketers, we can start segmenting everything. And it's oh, well, the SMBs are different enterprises. Let's build different messaging for them. And the admin's different than the user, that's different than the buyer. And let's message based on them. And, Germany's way different than US, and let's build separate messaging for them. And before you know it, you have 50 different messages that you're going out with. And the wise person told me, he's look, you can either create separate messages for all of them, or you can look for the unifying thread that unites all those together. And so I like, it's easier to think of that versus my head explodes with all the marketing collateral and 50 different variations of it. But we do, it's we try to think about, what is the core pain point that all of our audience have, whether you're an admin, whether you're the owner, whether you're an end user. And it turns out people hate email and meetings, that's pretty good. And they want everyone's team communications in one place. So we really try to manage around that. But to that extent too, the NPS stuff does help you with that, or the surveys. We do an optional sign-up survey. So we'll give you $50 in free credits if you fill that out. We ask you hey, why did you end up choosing us? Was it all your comms in one place? Did you want to be more productive? And a lot of times getting that data helps us shape our messaging and how we describe it.
Is there an age demographic that I obviously think that the younger generation are kind of past email anyway, are the kind of strength going in. But when you see younger companies, are they quicker adopters, or is that kind of past that stage?
I think like most companies, you start off in Silicon Valley, but we often get asked that question, like, oh, are you just in tech, or is it just developers that use us? And so one of the things we did pretty early on is LinkedIn. We do advertising on LinkedIn too, and you can actually get a pixel on your homepage that identifies people that visit you, like exactly what verticals are they in and what industries and segments. And one of the things we found out really quickly was like wow, we had a lot of companies coming that were non-Silicon Valley, a lot of non-developers. I mean, it's amazing. We have like industrial solvent companies that use Slack. We have giant companies like Samsung, U.S. State Department, really across the board, very diverse. We have like 53% of our business outside of US and Canada. And that's amazing because we have not localized our support. We don't have localized billing and currency. And it just kind of speaks to like people hate email and meetings everywhere. No matter what age demographic you are, they hate those.
Yeah. Over here.
Hi. So for the product that already has traction, at which point do you think the team should start to put resources on marketing?
My litmus test is always, do you have product market fit? And I think if you've established that, like now or whenever you get that, again, I think different people have different views on like what marketing does. Like my view is it helps accelerate that growth trajectory. And if you're working with good marketers, you're going to be able to show that through a series of data, metrics, and help accelerate it out. But yeah, and it's almost like gasoline to the fire. Once you've got a good fit there, man, pour it on, because we live in a bubble here, and everyone thinks, oh, they all know about. I mean, this is great. I love when everybody raises their hand, but like I go to other cities, and maybe half, a third. I've been in a room where like one person raised their hand, they knew about Slack, and it was it was a different industry, and it was like manufacturing, but it was like, you got to get outside the bubble, and marketing can help accelerate that awareness.
But with that, I'd just like to thank Bill for coming in, speaking to us. He's an incredibly busy guy, and we really appreciate you coming and sharing your wisdom here. And is it Slack HQ? At Slack HQ is
at
the
Slack
Twitter,
HQ.
so we can screw all these metrics. If we all tweet it now, it'd be great. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thank you for having me.